Hello everybody, welcome back to the channel. If you do not know, my name is Ethan Riley. I'm a senior Division I pole vaulter at Florida International University, nearing the end of my degree in sport and exercise science. And today I've got a little bit different of a video for you. I'm going to be taking you through a full strength and conditioning day for a sport called Sepak Takraw. And this is going to be an example of an in-season lift, so we're going to be focusing a lot on heavy concentric compound movements and body weight eccentric movements like plyometrics, drop jumps, and depth jumps, stuff like that. So we're going to be making sure that we manage our fatigue throughout the season. We're going to be focusing on power output and making sure that we stay healthy and reduce the risk of injury throughout our season. All right, so this particular workout is going to be following a sprint session. So by the time the athletes get to the weight room, they should already be pretty good and warmed up. So we're going to jump right into some altitude drops. We're going to start with 24 inches. We're going to do 3 sets of 6, and then we're going to switch to some depth jumps up onto a box. So this is going to work on our landing, dealing with high eccentric force, which in Sepak Takraw is a big portion of the sport because it involves a lot of vertical jumping. So right now we're just going to work on our landing mechanics. We're going to make sure that our knees are tracking, our ankles are tracking how we want them to, making sure that we stay safe in the landing of our jumps.
Alright, so as I'm stepping off the box here, I'm going to be dorsiflexing my ankles, and then as soon as I hit the ground, I'm going to plantar flex. So I'm actually attacking the ground with my feet as I'm landing and as I am absorbing that force through the glutes, through the proximal hamstrings, and through the quads. This exercise is going to do a really good job of preparing our central nervous system for eccentric forces that are going to be placed on it when we move into the cleans later on.
So now I'm going to show you a different angle where you can see that from the side, we want our hips and our knees to break that force at the exact same time. We don't want one to be overcompensating. We don't want to hinge at our hips. We don't want to buckle at our knees. And so this way we can ensure that those eccentric forces are being absorbed by 2 very large muscle groups, so our glutes and our quads.
In other words, we want our athletes to become as efficient as possible when applying braking forces, which comes from repetitions over time. And you can see here from this angle that instead of a quarter squat position, as I mentioned before, we're almost looking at a piston position. So we want just a very slight drop in our hips, a very slight flexion of our knees, and we want to be as quick as possible with the absorption of all that force.
All right, now we're going to move into some depth jumps. So we're going to be falling from an 18-inch box, landing on the ground, jumping as quick as we can up to a 12-inch box. This, we want to make sure that we are being as quick as we can off the ground.
What you'll see in these videos is that as I'm dropping off the box, I am dorsiflexing my ankles, and then right before I hit the ground, I am plantar flexing my ankles as hard as I can and as fast as I can in order to produce as much force as possible in the shortest amount of time. Because Sepak Takraw is an anaerobic or power-based sport, this means that we need our athletes' stretch shortening cycles to be as quick and efficient as possible. And if you do not know, a stretch shortening cycle is the time it takes for an athlete to absorb force through eccentric contractions of their muscles, store that elastic energy within their tendons, and then as fast as possible switch to a concentric contraction of the muscles. And this, like the mastery of all things, takes time and repetitions. So the more we can have our athletes doing plyometric exercises with adequate rest, the better suited they will be for force absorption as well as force production.
Now, because our first exercise of the main workout is going to be a clean from the blocks, we are going to move now into a clean cycle. So we're going to perform 3 sets of 2 each. We're going to do a clean shrug, or a clean pull, a clean high pull, and then we're going to actually catch the clean. And this is going to make sure that we have our movement patterns down. We're feeling nice. We're feeling ready to start cleaning some heavy weight.
What we want to see here is that the bar is staying as vertical as possible, and any deviation from this will tell us one of 3 things. Either the knees are extending too early, the hips are extending too early, or the shrug is not as vertical as it can be.
And with these clean cycles, we are going to do a pyramid scheme for this warm-up. We're going to start with 65% of our hang clean max. And then for our second set, we're going to go to 70%. And then for our third set, we're going to be going to 75% before we start the actual block cleans.
As you will see with these next 3 sets, all the same things apply. We want to make sure that our bar path is staying as vertical as possible. In order to do this, you'll actually see that as I'm performing the pull, my leg position is vertical, whereas my trunk or spine position will be slightly extended. This clears space for the bar to move directly vertical, as well as gives the athlete time to shoot under the bar or drop under the bar as fast as they can.
So there we just finished our clean cycles. Now we're gonna move into cleans from blocks. We're gonna hammer in that concentric force output from our glutes and our quads. This is gonna be 5 sets of 1 at 75%, and then we'll move into our actual working sets of 6x2 at 80%.
One thing I haven't mentioned yet is the eccentric or braking forces that are applied to the proximal hamstrings, glutes, and quads during the catch of the clean. And it's incredibly important to train these in the weight room because during sprinting, these are some of the highest forces that are applied to the body within all sports.
So those 5 sets are gonna finish out our neural prep, and now we are gonna move into the main workout, which again is going to be block cleans. This time we're gonna do a different rep scheme, a different set scheme, where we're gonna up the weight, really focus on concentric output of our glutes and our quads, which are obviously, are very, very important. The most important for jumping ability. So we're gonna move right into that. I'll put the rest time on the screen, and then let's get into it.
With these block cleans, we are again just going to be hammering home those same points that I talked about earlier, as well as teaching our athletes how to safely and efficiently transfer energy throughout the kinetic chain. 2 things we really want to look for when our athletes are doing any sort of cleans or Olympic movements are how fast the bar is moving and how high are we catching the bar. These are going to be huge indicators on how much stress is being applied to the central nervous system, both within sport practice and within the weight room. Now, because we need max effort or max intent to move the weight, if I saw an athlete's bar slowing down or they weren't catching it as high, I would either increase their rest intervals or I would decrease the weight to make sure that they are still moving that bar as fast as possible.
Now, since we are in a power phase / maintenance phase, we want to make sure that we are progressing our compound movements. So now, instead of say a back squat or a front squat or something like that, we're gonna move into continuous trap bar jumps. And we want these to be heavy enough to where when our athletes are landing, they are trying to jump as high as they can, but the weight should be pulling them down. So you'll see whenever I land, the weight is actually gonna be pulling me down as I am trying to push force upwards. And we're gonna superset this with drop jumps. So we're gonna have about a 12 to 14 inch box. We're gonna drop off the edge and we're gonna jump as high as we can. This is gonna be really good for mimicking those same movement patterns and recruiting as many motor units as we possibly can while producing as much force as possible.
Now, the purpose of contrast sets are to maximally recruit motor units. And the way we accomplish this is by fatiguing the type 1 motor units of the nervous system, which, because we are moving with max intent, forces the recruitment of type 2 motor units, which are responsible for short bursts of high force output. So we accomplish this by pairing one heavy strength exercise with a ballistic body weight exercise that mimic the same movement patterns. And you can see that the degrees of flexion of both my hips and knees at the bottom of the trap bar jumps as well as the depth jumps are about the same, so we accomplish this goal.
All right, now we are done with the power aspect of the workout. Now we're gonna move to some slide board hamstring curls, some slide board adductor work. We're gonna hit some core, and then we're gonna do a cool down and get out of here.
As you saw in the video of Sepak Takraw being played, the degrees of flexibility of the player's hamstrings and hip flexors are just out of this world. So this is going to be a great exercise for putting high amounts of force or tension on both of those muscle groups through huge ranges of motion. So we're not only going to be improving our strength, but we're also going to be improving our flexibility. As you may know, a lot of times the lateral hamstrings are more developed than the medial hamstrings. So what you'll see your athletes start to do as they get fatigued is start to externally rotate the foot or the femur. So we want to cue our athletes to try to keep their toes as vertical as possible. That way we can grow the overall strength of the hamstrings rather than biasing the already more developed lateral hamstrings. Another thing you'll see is that as fatigue sets in, an athlete may start to rotate toward their trail leg. This again is just going to place more bias on those lateral hamstrings. So we want to try to make sure that our athletes' pelvis are staying nice and straight without rotating. Now we move into some lateral lunge slide outs. Same principles as the hamstring curls that we just did. We're putting huge stretch on the adductors, which in Sepak Takraw need to be flexible, need to have high ranges of motion. So this is a really good exercise for building flexibility and building range of motion in the adductors. One thing we want to make sure is that our athlete's plant foot, or in this case my right foot, is staying in contact with the ground throughout the entire movement. This is going to make sure that we are putting adequate stress or tension on the adductor magnus. Now the adductor magnus is also considered the fourth hamstring because it aids in hip extension. Keeping the foot on the ground is going to make sure that the muscle fibers are in line with that muscle particularly, as well as the other adductors, so that we are getting maximal stretch and maximal tension. And we're going to finish off this workout with some hanging leg raises. In order for this exercise to accomplish our desired muscle activation, we have to see that our athletes are going into a posterior pelvic tilt. So if you see your athletes just lifting their legs to 90 degrees of hip flexion, that is going to be mostly hip flexor work, which is good and it has its place. But for this exercise, we have to see that our athletes are going into a posterior pelvic tilt in order to bring their shins to the bar. Now for a cool down, we're going to be doing 2 sets of 6 each for all of these different exercises. This first one is just going to be a walking lunge with an overhead reach. We're going to be stretching out our hip flexors, our glutes, our rectus abdominis, as well as the lats that we just activated with those hanging leg raises. Next, we move into a pigeon pose hold, again holding for 5 seconds, feeling the stretch, and then switching to the other leg. Next, we're going to move into hamstring scoop holds. We want to make sure that our athletes' ankles are dorsiflexed as well as their knees being fully extended. This is going to put a huge stretch on the hamstrings as well as the calves. Next is the quad stretch, so we're going to stretch all 4 of our quadriceps muscles as well as our hip flexors. And finally, for our dynamic stretches, we are going to do a sumo squat hold with a thoracic rotation. This is going to stretch our adductors, our glutes, as well as our spinal erectors. Now a couple of static stretches. We're going to stretch our adductors here as much as we can, as well again as our spinal erectors. And we are going to finish off this cool down with a scorpion pose. Try to have your athletes keep their hips on the ground. This is going to maximally stretch their hip flexors as well as their spinal flexors, so the rectus abdominis. And for a little bit better of a stretch, you can see I tilt my head back. This is just going to place more stretch on the rectus abdominis.
Alrighty, y'all, there is the full workout. I hope you enjoyed, maybe learned something. Try it out for yourself sometime and drop a comment below. Let me know how you like it, things you might want to change, things you might want to add in. But again, hope you enjoyed the video. I'll see you guys in the next one.